Victoria Ashford stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her father's Manhattan penthouse, watching the city sprawl beneath her like a glittering circuit board. At 22, she possessed everything money could buy: designer clothes that hung unworn in walk-in closets, luxury cars she never drove, and access to exclusive venues where she felt like a stranger in her own life. Her reflection in the glass revealed a young woman of striking beauty, with platinum blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold and eyes the color of winter sky. But behind those eyes lay a sadness that no amount of wealth could cure. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of the city's heartbeat 40 stories below. The penthouse around her was a monument to her father's success. Original Picassos adorned the walls, Italian marble floors stretched endlessly, and every piece of furniture had been selected by world-renowned interior designers. Yet Victoria felt more like a museum piece than a person living in this space. Her father, Richard Ashford, had built his empire in technology and real estate, accumulating billions, while Victoria grew up largely in the care of nannies and tutors. He meant well, showering her with material gifts, but had never learned to give her what she truly craved: genuine connection and the freedom to discover who she really was. Victoria's phone buzzed with another invitation to a charity gala, a business dinner, or a social event where she would smile politely and say very little. These gatherings were performances where she played the role of the perfect billionaire's daughter, never revealing the creative fire that burned within her heart. She moved away from the window and sat at the grand piano that dominated one corner of the living room. Her fingers found the keys instinctively, and a haunting melody began to emerge. Music was her secret sanctuary, the one place where she felt truly alive. But it was also her deepest shame, a talent she kept hidden from the world that expected her to be seen and not heard. The melody she played spoke of longing and isolation, of dreams deferred, and a voice that ached to be set free. Chapter 2. The Underground Discovery. 3 nights later, Victoria found herself walking the rain-slicked streets of Brooklyn, far from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. She had dismissed her driver hours ago, needing to feel the city's pulse without the barrier of bulletproof glass and leather seats. The transformation was remarkable. Gone were the designer clothes, replaced by vintage jeans, worn boots, and a simple black jacket that helped her blend into the night. She had discovered this ritual months ago, these clandestine journeys into the city's hidden corners, where real people lived real lives. Tonight, the sound of music drew her toward a narrow alley where a soft glow emanated from a basement entrance. Above the door, a simple sign read, "The Underground," in faded letters. The music grew stronger as she descended the steep stairs, and she found herself in an intimate venue that pulsed with authentic energy. Exposed brick walls were adorned with vintage posters and string lights. Mismatched tables filled the space, and a small stage commanded attention at the far end. This wasn't the sterile perfection of the concert halls she knew. This was music in its purest form. On stage, a young man with dark hair and calloused hands commanded a guitar with extraordinary skill. His voice was raw and honest, telling stories of struggle and hope that resonated through the crowded room. Victoria found herself transfixed, not just by his talent, but by the genuine emotion that infused every note. She claimed a table in the shadows, ordering coffee from a waitress with purple hair and kind eyes. Around her, the audience was diverse and engaged. Students, artists, workers, dreamers, all united by their love of authentic music. This was everything her gilded world was not: real, passionate, and alive. The guitarist's set ended to enthusiastic applause, and Victoria watched as he interacted naturally with audience members, sharing jokes and stories. There was no pretense here, no carefully orchestrated image, just human connection through the universal language of music. As the evening progressed, Victoria witnessed an open mic session where ordinary people shared extraordinary talents. An elderly man played blues harmonica that made her eyes water, a teenage girl recited poetry that spoke to her soul, and a middle-aged woman sang with a voice that could heal broken hearts. Chapter 3. The Voice in the Shadows. Victoria became a regular at the Underground, always choosing the same shadowy corner table where she could observe without being observed. She learned that the guitarist's name was Marcus Chen, a music teacher by day who performed to pay for his sister's medical treatments. His story was one of sacrifice and determination, qualities that her privileged world often lacked. She also discovered that the Underground was more than just a venue. It was a community. People here supported each other's dreams, celebrated small victories, and offered comfort during difficult times. Victoria had never experienced such genuine human connection, and she found herself drawn deeper into this world that existed parallel to her own. One evening, as Marcus performed a particularly moving song about finding your voice, Victoria felt something stir within her chest. Her hands trembled as suppressed emotions rose to the surface. She had been hiding for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to want something with genuine passion. After the show, she lingered longer than usual, watching as Marcus packed his guitar. He seemed to sense her presence and looked in her direction, offering a friendly smile that made her heart race unexpectedly. "Enjoy the show?" he asked, approaching her table with easy confidence. Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. Up close, she could see the sincerity in his dark eyes, the slight scar on his chin, the way his hands moved with the precision of someone who lived through music. "You're here most nights," Marcus observed, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm Marcus." "Victoria," she replied quietly, using her real name for the first time in months in a social setting. They talked for nearly an hour about music, dreams, and the way certain songs could capture emotions that words alone couldn't express. Marcus spoke passionately about his belief that everyone had music inside them, waiting to be discovered and shared. Victoria listened with growing wonder, feeling understood in a way she never had before. When she finally left that night, walking back toward her other world, Victoria carried with her the echo of Marcus's words and the memory of his knowing smile. Something fundamental had shifted inside her, like a door that had been locked for years was finally beginning to creak open. Chapter 4. The Secret Lessons. Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself living two completely separate lives. By day, she attended board meetings at her father's company, hosted charity luncheons, and maintained the polished facade expected of someone in her position. But her evenings belonged to the Underground, where she discovered a version of herself she never knew existed. Marcus had offered to give her guitar lessons, and she accepted with a mixture of excitement and terror. They met in a small practice room above the main venue, surrounded by scratched guitars and mismatched amplifiers. Victoria's hands, accustomed to piano keys, struggled initially with the strings, but Marcus proved to be a patient and encouraging teacher. "Music isn't about perfection," he told her during their third lesson, watching as she fumbled through a simple chord progression. "It's about expression. What are you trying to say?" The question caught Victoria off guard. In her world, communication was carefully scripted, every word calculated for maximum effect with minimum vulnerability. The idea of expressing something genuine and unfiltered was both thrilling and terrifying. As the lessons progressed, Victoria began to open up in small ways. She shared stories about feeling trapped in her father's expectations, about the loneliness of being constantly surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Marcus listened without judgment, occasionally offering insights that came from his own experiences with struggle and perseverance. During one particularly vulnerable moment, Victoria found herself humming a melody that had been haunting her dreams. Marcus encouraged her to explore it further, and together they crafted her first original song. The process was revelation, watching abstract emotions transform into concrete lyrics and melodies felt like discovering a new language she had always known, but never spoken. The song was simple and raw, telling the story of a bird in a golden cage who had forgotten how to sing. As Victoria's voice carried the melody for the first time, she felt something break open inside her chest. Marcus watched with amazement as this reserved young woman transformed into something luminous and powerful. "You have a gift," he said quietly when the song ended. "The world needs to hear this." Victoria shook her head immediately, the familiar fear rushing back. "I could never perform in public. Never." Chapter 5. The Father's Discovery. Richard Ashford had built his empire by paying attention to details others missed, so it didn't take long for him to notice the changes in his daughter. Victoria seemed different, more animated during conversations, distracted during business meetings, and mysteriously absent during evening hours when she had previously been predictably present. His concern grew when his security team reported that Victoria was frequently dismissing her driver and disappearing into parts of the city that were decidedly beneath her social station. As a father, he worried for her safety. As a businessman, he feared scandal that could affect his carefully cultivated public image. The investigation he commissioned revealed Victoria's regular presence at the underground, though the reports failed to capture the significance of what she was experiencing there. To Richard, it appeared that his daughter was slumming in dive bars, possibly experimenting with rebellion or worse, drugs. On a cold Tuesday evening, Richard decided to see for himself what was drawing his daughter to such unseemly establishments. He arrived at the underground in his armored sedan, causing quite a stir in the neighborhood where luxury vehicles were rare sightings. Inside the venue, Richard felt profoundly out of place among the eclectic crowd of artists and dreamers. His expensive suit and obvious discomfort marked him as clearly as a neon sign. He chose a table near the back, scanning the room for any sign of Victoria. When Marcus took the stage, Richard initially dismissed him as another struggling musician seeking handouts from wealthy patrons. But as the performance unfolded, even Richard's cynical businessman's heart couldn't deny the young man's extraordinary talent and genuine passion. It was during Marcus's second song that Richard spotted Victoria in her usual corner, but she was transformed. Gone was the polished, reserved young woman he knew. In her place sat someone radiant with engagement and joy, completely absorbed in the music and the atmosphere. For the first time in years, Richard saw his daughter truly happy, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. In his efforts to provide Victoria with every material advantage, he had somehow failed to give her the one thing she needed most: the freedom to discover her own path to fulfillment. As he watched Victoria's face light up during Marcus's performance, Richard began to understand that his daughter's evening escapes weren't about rebellion or disappointment in her privileged life. They were about finding something authentic in a world that had offered her everything except the chance to be genuine. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. The confrontation Richard had been dreading came the following evening when Victoria returned from another night at the underground. She found him waiting in the penthouse's living room, still wearing his business suit despite the late hour. The tension in the air was palpable as father and daughter faced each other across the vast expanse of marble flooring. "We need to talk," Richard said, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire, but none of the warmth Victoria craved from him as a father. Victoria's stomach dropped as she recognized the tone. Someone had discovered her secret world, and she felt the walls of her golden cage closing in around her once again. "I know about your activities," Richard continued, struggling to find words that wouldn't sound dismissive of something that clearly meant so much to his daughter. "The venue, the musician, all of it." Victoria's cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. For months, she had been living authentically for the first time in her life, and now that freedom was being threatened. "It's not what you think," she said quietly, her voice barely audible in the cavernous room. Richard moved closer, his expression softening slightly as he saw the genuine distress in his daughter's eyes. "Then help me understand, Victoria. Why are you spending your evenings in that place? What aren't you getting here that you're finding there?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Victoria had spent her entire life protecting her father from the knowledge that his love, while genuine, had often felt more like a business arrangement than a personal relationship. For several long moments, neither spoke. The city hummed far below them, and the grandfather clock in the corner marked time with relentless precision. Finally, Victoria found her voice. "I'm finding myself there, Dad. For the first time in my life, I'm discovering who I might be if I wasn't Richard Ashford's daughter." The words hit Richard harder than any business setback ever had. He had always assumed that providing Victoria with the best of everything was enough, that his love was adequately expressed through security, comfort, and opportunity. The possibility that she might need something he couldn't buy had never seriously occurred to him. Chapter 7. The Performance Anxiety. Following her conversation with her father, Victoria threw herself deeper into her music lessons with Marcus, using creative expression as an escape from the complicated emotions surrounding her family relationships. Her songwriting had evolved rapidly, channeling years of suppressed feelings into melodies that surprised even her with their power and authenticity. Marcus had been gently encouraging her to consider performing publicly, starting perhaps with the supportive audience at the Underground. But the very suggestion sent Victoria into spirals of anxiety that left her hands trembling and her voice caught in her throat. "I understand the fear," Marcus said during one of their sessions, watching Victoria struggle with the concept of vulnerability in front of strangers. "But you're depriving the world of something beautiful when you hide your gift." Victoria shook her head violently, her breathing becoming shallow at the mere thought of standing on that small stage with dozens of eyes focused on her. In her world, public appearances were carefully choreographed events where she smiled and said very little. The idea of revealing her authentic self felt like standing naked in Times Square. "You don't understand," she insisted. "People have expectations of me. They see me as Richard Ashford's daughter, not as a person with my own thoughts and feelings. If I fail up there, it won't just be my failure, it will be a reflection on my entire family." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, beginning to understand the unique pressures that came with Victoria's privileged position. "What if we started smaller? What if you performed just for me, but we recorded it? You could hear how you sound without the pressure of a live audience." The compromise felt manageable, and Victoria agreed to try. They set up a simple recording system in the practice room, and Marcus encouraged her to perform the song they had written together about the bird in the golden cage. As Victoria's voice filled the small space, something magical happened. The camera captured not just her sound, but her transformation. The way her posture changed, how her eyes closed as she lost herself in the music, the pure emotion that radiated from every note. When they played back the recording, Victoria barely recognized the powerful, expressive woman on the screen. "That's you," Marcus said softly. "That's who you really are when you stop hiding." For the first time, Victoria began to see herself as Marcus saw her. Not as a billionaire's daughter playing at being a musician, but as a genuine artist with something meaningful to offer the world. Chapter 8. The Family Secret. Richard Ashford had been carrying a secret for over 20 years, one that his conversation with Victoria had brought rushing back to the surface. Before building his business empire, before the billions and the public recognition, he had been a struggling musician himself, performing in venues much like the Underground, where Victoria now found her solace. That evening, after their confrontation, Richard found himself standing before a locked closet in his private study that he hadn't opened in decades. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, was his first guitar, a battered acoustic instrument that had accompanied him through years of hope and struggle before practical considerations forced him to abandon his musical dreams. He carried the guitar to the penthouse's living room and, after ensuring Victoria was asleep, began to play for the first time in over 2 decades. His fingers were stiff and uncertain, but the muscle memory gradually returned, along with fragments of songs he had written as a young man desperate to make his mark on the world. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to give Victoria every advantage he had never had, he had inadvertently recreated the same suppression of artistic dreams that had driven him from music into business. He had become the practical voice that had once silenced his own creative aspirations. The next morning, Victoria found her father sitting at the kitchen table with the guitar resting against his chair. She stopped in the doorway, stunned by this revelation of a side of him she had never imagined existed. "You play?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder and confusion. Richard looked up from his coffee, his expression vulnerable in a way Victoria had never seen before. "I used to, before everything else became more important." He told her about his early years as a performer, about the dreams he had abandoned in favor of financial security and social respectability. He spoke about the songs he had written, the small venues where he had performed, and the gradual realization that talent alone wasn't enough to sustain a life in music. "I wanted to give you choices I never had," he admitted. "But I think I took away the one choice that mattered most, the choice to follow your passion." Victoria sat beside him, seeing her father clearly for perhaps the first time. Behind the successful businessman was a man who had sacrificed his own artistic dreams, and who now understood that his daughter was struggling with the same fundamental choice between security and authenticity. "Will you play something for me?" Victoria asked quietly. Richard's hands shook slightly as he picked up the guitar, but when he began to play, the years fell away, and Victoria heard echoes of the young dreamer he had once been. Chapter 9. The Unexpected Alliance. The revelation of her father's musical past changed everything for Victoria. The man she had seen as an obstacle to her artistic dreams suddenly became a potential ally who understood her struggles from personal experience. Richard, for his part, saw in Victoria's passion a chance to reclaim something he thought he had lost forever. They began spending evenings together in the penthouse, sharing music and stories in a way that gradually rebuilt their relationship on a foundation of mutual understanding rather than obligation. Richard's business acumen, combined with his renewed appreciation for artistic expression, led to conversations about how Victoria might pursue her musical interests without sacrificing her family's reputation. "What if we created opportunities instead of hiding from them?" Richard suggested one evening as they worked through one of Victoria's compositions together. "What if we used our resources to support emerging artists while giving you a platform to develop your own voice?" The idea was intriguing, but still terrifying for Victoria. She had grown comfortable with her dual existence, the public persona during the day and her authentic self at the underground in the evenings. The thought of merging these worlds felt overwhelming. Richard could see her internal struggle and made a decision that surprised both of them. "I want to meet this Marcus," he announced. "If he's been helping you discover this part of yourself, I need to understand who he is and what he sees in you." Victoria's first instinct was to refuse, to protect the separate sanctuary she had created. But she realized that if she truly wanted to grow as an artist and as a person, she would eventually need to stop compartmentalizing her life into distinct, isolated pieces. The meeting was arranged for the following week at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in Manhattan that bridged the gap between Victoria's two worlds. She arrived early, her stomach churning with anxiety about how her father and Marcus would react to each other. When Marcus walked through the cafe door, Victoria was struck by how naturally he carried himself in this unfamiliar environment. He didn't seem intimidated by the prospect of meeting one of the city's most powerful businessmen. Instead, he appeared genuinely curious about Victoria's family dynamic. Richard arrived precisely on time, and Victoria watched nervously as the two men sized each other up. She had worried that her father would be dismissive of Marcus's modest background, or that Marcus would be resentful of the wealth and privilege that Richard represented. Instead, Within minutes of conversation, both men recognized in each other a shared passion for music and a genuine care for Victoria's well-being. Chapter 10. The Plan. The cafe meeting evolved into a 3-hour conversation that laid the foundation for an unexpected collaboration. Richard's business mind immediately grasped the potential for creating something meaningful that could serve multiple purposes: supporting emerging artists, providing Victoria with a safe space to develop her talents, and potentially generating positive publicity for the family's philanthropic efforts. Marcus brought street-level knowledge of what struggling musicians actually needed, not just financial support, but access to quality equipment, professional recording facilities, and audiences who appreciated authentic artistry. His experience at the Underground had shown him how powerful music could be when it was allowed to develop organically within a supportive community. Victoria found herself caught between excitement and terror as the two men outlined possibilities for a formal music foundation that would offer scholarships, performance opportunities, and recording facilities for emerging artists. The foundation would also host regular showcases where new talent could be discovered and nurtured. "You could start by performing at our first showcase," Richard suggested gently, watching his daughter's reaction carefully. "Nothing too elaborate, just a song or two for an invited audience of music industry professionals and potential foundation supporters." The suggestion sent Victoria's anxiety spiraling, but Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "We could perform together," he offered, "a duet of that song we wrote. You wouldn't be up there alone." Over the following weeks, the three of them worked tirelessly to bring the foundation concept to life. Richard's team of lawyers and accountants handled the legal framework, while Marcus consulted on the practical aspects of supporting developing musicians. Victoria threw herself into learning about music administration, discovering that her business education could be applied to something she genuinely cared about. The first showcase was scheduled for 2 months away, to be held in a converted warehouse space that would provide an intimate yet professional environment. The guest list would include music critics, talent scouts, and philanthropists known for supporting the arts. As the date approached, Victoria's practice sessions with Marcus intensified. They worked on breathing techniques to manage her performance anxiety, staging that would feel natural rather than forced, and ways to connect with an audience that went beyond simply delivering notes and lyrics. "Remember," Marcus told her during their final rehearsal, "you're not performing for them. You're sharing something meaningful with people who want to hear it. There's a difference." The distinction felt crucial, transforming the upcoming performance from an ordeal to be endured into an opportunity to connect with others through the universal language of music. Chapter 11. The Night of Truth. The evening of the showcase arrived with October rain drumming against the warehouse windows, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt both cozy and electric with possibility. Victoria spent the afternoon in alternating states of calm preparation and absolute panic, her emotions swinging wildly as the reality of her public debut approached. Richard had spared no expense in transforming the space into something magical. Soft lighting created warm pools throughout the venue, small round tables encouraged intimate conversation, and the stage, while modest in size, was equipped with professional sound equipment that would showcase each performer's voice to its fullest potential. The invited guests began arriving as evening fell, and Victoria watched from a second-floor window as music industry professionals, philanthropists, and art supporters made their way through the entrance. These were people who attended dozens of similar events each year, sophisticated audiences who had heard everything and would not be easily impressed. Marcus found her in her makeshift dressing room, where she sat staring at her reflection in a handheld mirror, hardly recognizing the elegantly dressed woman looking back at her. Gone were the casual clothes she wore to the Underground. Tonight, she wore a simple but stunning black dress that her father had selected specifically for this performance. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she set down the mirror. Like I'm about to jump out of an airplane without knowing if my parachute will open. Marcus smiled at the analogy. The parachute is your voice, Victoria. It's been there all along. You just need to trust it. They could hear the murmur of conversation from below as the audience took their seats. The showcase would feature 5 emerging artists, with Victoria and Marcus performing fourth in the lineup. The timing would give her a chance to observe how other performers connected with this sophisticated audience while building anticipation for her own debut. As they made their way downstairs, Victoria caught sight of her father near the stage, speaking intently with a woman she recognized as a prominent music critic. Richard's face showed a mixture of pride and anxiety that mirrored her own emotions perfectly. The first 3 performances were stunning. A classical pianist who made the warehouse feel like Carnegie Hall, a folk duo whose harmonies sent chills through the audience, and a young rapper whose lyrics brought social consciousness to life through rhythm and rhyme. Each artist demonstrated the power of authentic expression, and Victoria felt both inspired and intimidated by the caliber of talent surrounding her. When their names were announced, Victoria's legs felt unsteady as she walked toward the stage with Marcus. Chapter 12. The Voice Emerges. Standing in the spotlight, Victoria could see faces in the audience more clearly than she had expected. These weren't faceless judges waiting to critique her performance. They were individuals who had chosen to spend their evening supporting emerging artists. In the front row, her father sat with his hands clasped tightly, his expression radiating encouragement and unconditional love. Marcus settled onto his stool with his guitar, offering Victoria a reassuring nod as she approached the microphone. The warehouse had fallen completely silent except for the gentle patter of rain against the skylights, creating an intimacy that made the space feel smaller and more welcoming. "This song," Victoria began, her voice surprisingly steady, "is about finding the courage to be yourself when the world expects you to be someone else." The simple introduction felt like stepping through a doorway she could never close again. As Marcus played the opening chords of their collaboration, Victoria closed her eyes and let the melody carry her beyond her fear. Her voice, when it emerged, was nothing like the carefully modulated tones she used in her public appearances as Richard Ashford's daughter. This voice was raw and honest, carrying the pain of years spent hiding her true self and the joy of finally allowing that self to emerge. The lyrics spoke of golden cages and forgotten songs, of finding freedom through authenticity and connection. As the song progressed, Victoria felt her stage presence grow stronger. She opened her eyes and began to connect with individual faces in the audience, seeing recognition and emotion reflected back at her. The music critic in the front row had stopped taking notes and was simply listening, completely absorbed in the performance. When they reached the bridge, the most vulnerable part of the song, Victoria's voice soared with a power she hadn't known she possessed. The warehouse acoustics carried every nuance of emotion, and she could feel the audience holding its collective breath as the melody climbed to its peak. The final note hung in the air long after Victoria and Marcus had finished, sustained by the perfect acoustics and the audience's complete attention. For several heartbeats, the silence stretched on, and Victoria wondered if she had somehow failed to connect. Then the applause began. Not the polite appreciation typical of formal events, but genuine enthusiasm from people who had witnessed something special. Victoria felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the audience rose to their feet, their response confirming what she had hardly dared to hope. Her authentic voice was exactly what the world needed to hear. Richard was the first to reach the stage, embracing his daughter with a fierce pride that needed no words. Chapter 13. The New Beginning. 6 months after the showcase, Victoria's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The Ashford Music Foundation had become a respected force in supporting emerging artists, with Victoria serving as its artistic director and primary advocate. Her debut performance had been featured in major music publications, leading to opportunities she was still learning to navigate. More importantly, the Foundation's work was creating real change in the lives of young musicians who needed exactly the kind of support that Marcus had recognized from his experience at the Underground. The converted warehouse had become a permanent performance space, hosting weekly showcases that were drawing attention from music industry professionals across the country. Victoria's relationship with her father had evolved into a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared passion. Richard had even begun playing guitar again, occasionally joining the Foundation's informal jam sessions, where business executives and struggling musicians created music together without regard for social hierarchies. Her romance with Marcus had developed naturally from their musical collaboration, built on the solid foundation of shared values and artistic compatibility. They were planning their first professional recording together, with songs that told the story of finding authentic love through authentic self-expression. Standing in her old spot at the Underground, the venue that had sparked her transformation, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her from hiding in shadows to performing in spotlights. The club remained unchanged, still offering sanctuary to artists seeking community and authentic expression. "Nervous about tomorrow?" Marcus asked, joining her at their familiar corner table. Tomorrow would bring Victoria's first solo concert, performed for a sold-out audience at a prestigious venue that had hosted some of music's greatest voices. The little girl, who had once declared she would never sing in public, was about to prove that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the smallest acts of courage. "Not nervous," Victoria replied, taking his hand as she watched a young woman approach the stage for the open mic session. "Excited. There's a difference." As applause filled the Underground, Victoria knew that her story was really just beginning. She had found her voice not by abandoning who she was, but by embracing every part of herself. The privileged daughter, the hidden artist, the woman brave enough to be vulnerable in front of others. The note that had changed her life hadn't been a single moment of revelation, but a sustained commitment to authenticity that continued to resonate through everything she touched. Thank you so much for listening to Victoria's story of finding her voice and the courage to share it with the world. Music has the power to transform lives, break down barriers, and create connections that transcend social boundaries. If this story resonated with you, please let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love hearing from our global audience and learning how stories of courage and authenticity inspire people from all walks of life. Your support and engagement help us continue creating content that celebrates the power of following your dreams, no matter what obstacles stand in your way.